Early in the morning of December 24th, 1854, a group of Ute people arrived at the homestead of Marcelino Baca, a longtime resident of the valley who had lived for a while at Fort Pueblo. Tierra Blanco was leading them, and he approached the main house apparently peacefully. But one of Baca's workers, an elderly man named Jose Barella, realized something was amiss. He recognized that some of the Utes were riding Baca's horses, which they must have stolen from the paddocks before coming to the house. He warned Baca not to let Blanco approach. Baca shouldered his rifle and warned Blanco to leave. The Ute did so, riding off without another word, but they stole all of Baca's horses. Baca sent a rider to warn the other homesteads and villages along the Arkansas and Huerfano rivers, but realized it was far too late to warn the trading post. He and his workers remained in the main house, where they could hear the distant sounds of gunfire and shouting for the remainder of the morning. The Arkansas River Valley was one of the first areas of Colorado to be settled by colonists, and for good reasons. The area was not far from the established Santa Fe Trail, and also near enough to the mountains to take advantage of the fur trapping trade. The soil was fertile, the summers sunny, the winters mild. By the early 1850s, there were 2 trading posts along its banks, and the beginnings of villages along the river and its tributaries. Fort Pueblo was established at the confluence of the Arkansas River and Fountain Creek in Colorado in 1842 by traders George Simpson and Robert Fisher, who had been working at Bent's Fort some 70 miles downstream on the Arkansas River. The trading post's location was strategic, as it was located on the Cherokee Trail, the Trappers Trail, and near the Santa Fe Trail. It was the closest U.S. settlement to Taos, New Mexico, and the rivers provided plenty of water for agriculture. The fort's owners and traders pooled their money and formed partnerships to operate the post and primarily traded with the Ute and Apache Indians. They supplied the natives with sugar, cornmeal, flour, blankets, guns, coffee, iron tools, and other commodities in exchange for the prized buffalo robes. In 1849, Simpson and Fisher abandoned their fort when the fur trade declined. By 1854, Fort Pueblo was inhabited exclusively by native Mexicans from Taos, New Mexico, and their families. While the settlers in the Ute of the Arkansas River Valley had remained on hitherto peaceful terms, the ongoing war with the Jicarilla further south found support among many of their Ute allies. By the winter of 1853, the violence came to the valley. On the 25th of February, 1854, from the Legislative Council of New Mexico, William S. Messervy sent a memo to the U.S. Congress headed Jicarilla Indians. This complained that the Jicarillas moved from place to place among the settlements, continually committing depredations on the inhabitants, who could get no redress unless they took the law into their own hands. He asked for the Jicarillas to be, quote, settled in a small extent of country and induced to settle on the Pueblo and cultivate the soil and support themselves. In April of 1854, soon after the Battle of Cieneguilla in the Jicarilla War, Messervy was the acting governor for Governor Meriwether of the New Mexico Territory and also acted as superintendent of Indian Affairs. On April 29, 1854, he wrote to the Commissioner of Indian Affairs in Washington, George Washington Manypenny, quote, but as they have commenced this war, I am determined unless otherwise instructed from your department to listen to no terms of peace from them. The best interest of this territory and the highest dictates of humanity demand their extinction or their settlements in the Pueblos. Any of the Jicarilla Apache whom Lieutenant Colonel Philip St. George Cook's campaign of the Apache War of 1854 had failed to subdue had taken refuge with the Ute Indians, who lived in the mountains bordering the San Luis Valley of southern Colorado. Hardly had the Jicarilla trouble subsided than the Ute went on the rampage. In the early 1850s, Chico Velasquez and other Ute chiefs met several times with David Meriwether, the governor of New Mexico Territory, which at that time included much of Colorado. By all accounts, the meetings went well, and Meriwether spoke highly of the Utes for most of his career, but the results were less than ideal. When the Utes asked for firearms, they were refused outright. When Chico Velasquez asked instead for food, recognition of their ancestral territory, and protection from the Arapaho raids. Governor Meriwether promised to provide all of that. But when the time came, the center to distribute these gifts, the new Fort Massachusetts, was built nearly 50 miles away from the Utes' territory, across the San Juan Mountains at the headwaters of the Rio Grande. Moreover, settlers began to stream into the Arkansas and San Luis valleys, driving the game further afield. Their last conference was in the summer of 1854. The chiefs met with Governor Meriwether and Kit Carson in Taos, New Mexico, where they exchanged gifts. On their return journey, the chiefs broke out with smallpox. The disease spread rampant throughout the tribe, killing the peace chief Velasquez. This was the last straw for many of the Utes. Many of their people suspected that the disease was spread to them intentionally. They were frightened and furious, and with most of the old peace-minded chiefs now dead, it was necessary that a warrior emerge and renew his people. That warrior was Tierra Blanco. Blanco assumed leadership of the Maush Ute and banded with the Jicarilla dissidents from the previous year's fighting. In late autumn of 1854, the atmosphere of the Arkansas River Valley grew tense. There were reports of stolen cattle and signs of a large force scouting the area. One woman reported being chased by Ute warriors on horseback, and a trader was found killed, his body abandoned on the banks of Apache Creek. The Indians skirted the east side of the mountains, raiding isolated homesteads, as they moved north towards Fort Pueblo. Tierra Blanco casually walked into Fort Pueblo on Christmas Day, 1854, went right up to Benito Sandoval, as he did many times before, and talked to him. Benito had traded vegetables and goat's milk with the Maush and the Jicarilla before. Benito Sandoval and Tierra Blanco were friends, and Tierra needed Benito to keep thinking that. Tierra Blanco had challenged Benito to a friendly shooting contest. Benito agreed, and as they were shooting at their targets outside the fort, a crowd of Maush began to swell up around them. Benito invited Chief Blanco and his Maush and Jicarilla back inside the fort to feast. As they were drinking and feasting, Tierra Blanco gave his signal, and Blanco's soldiers began to massacre the Mexicans. Blanco's warriors killed 15 Mexican men, including Benito Sandoval, Benito Baca, Manuel Truyeca, Miera, and Nazario. A Canadian trapper was killed 100 yards away from the Pueblo. The Maushes captured Chapita Miera, a married Mexican woman, but they killed her soon afterwards at the Arroyo Salado, just south of the Pueblo. Benito's two sons, Felix and Juan Isidro Sandoval, were also captured by the Maush. Only 3 people escaped Tierra Blanco's ambush: Andrea, a Mexican wife, and Rosa, a squaw, hid in the brush in the river bottoms. A trader named Romaldo lost his tongue after being shot through the mouth, but was able to get away. The violence continued for almost a year until peace talks were held at Abiquiu, New Mexico. It was at this meeting that Felix Sandoval was freed as part of the negotiations. Through him, it was learned that Chapita Miera had been killed only days after the attack, while his younger brother, Juan Isidro, had been sold as a slave to the Navajo. Juan Isidro Sandoval was eventually recovered 2 years later by a trapper for the price of $300 in silver and a hawk and rifle. This tragic event and the Ute Wars that followed shaped southern and central Colorado history for years. The settlements in the Arkansas River Valley, which had previously been prosperous and steadily growing, were almost non-existent until the 1859 Pikes Peak Gold Rush. The relationship between the Utes and the settlers was never again as peaceful as it had been. The Fort Pueblo trading post was completely abandoned from the attack onward and was never again permanently inhabited. Frontiersmen and travelers would occasionally take refuge in its ruins, but never for long.